Good evening, friends. Welcome to this sixth lecture of Samalochana. As you all know, Samalochana is a lecture series started by NSI South Indian chapter to discuss on various social, cultural, political, and economic transformations, problems that have happened in South India. To understand the new developments and to understand where these societies are going. And NSI, New Socialist Initiative, is a a political ideological platform. It is committed to the revival of left movement in India in all its dimensions, theoretical, political, and in many other ways, because New Socialist Initiative began as an effort to understand all the important problems faced by left movement in India. And the problems, even though immensely important, but not taken up by any left organization due to various reasons. So we call ourselves a platform which thinks on behalf of entire left movement to deal with the major problems confronted by the left movement. So NSI South India has started recently this lecture series in the name of Samalochana. This is a sixth lecture in that series. In previous lectures, various senior literary critiques and cultural critiques, feminist scholars and theater arts scholars have spoken. And today we are lucky to have Professor Muzaffar Assadi here as a speaker. We are fortunate to have him here to speak on one of the very important subjects. So the role of caste and religion in shaping Indian Muslim identity, especially past 150 or 200 years or so, in given the political situation in which we are passing through, where Muslim community and Muslim identity is continuously made a target by certain forces, political forces. We need to understand this historical process of the formation of Muslim identity and the challenges faced by the community. I request Dr. Madhavi, my friend and comrade, to introduce Professor Assadi.
Thank you, Bhargava. And I'm very happy to introduce Professor Muzaffar Assadi to this audience today. Professor Assadi is a well-known public intellectual. He doesn't need an introduction in Kannada-speaking world. Since most of the audience here belong to various other states, he needs a brief introduction. I would try to give a very brief outline of his achievements, academic and otherwise. Professor Assadi hails from a small village named Shirva in coastal Karnataka. He belongs to Udupi Taluk. He obtained his MA in political science. After that, he joined Jawaharlal Nehru University for his MPhil and PhD degrees. And he has done his postdoctoral degree he obtained it from University of Chicago, USA. And he was a Rockefeller postdoctoral fellow. His fields of specialization include agrarian studies, globalization, political sociology, democratic theory, Gandhism, human rights in India, global political theory, among other things. His areas of special interest are globalization, Indian democracy, Indian social structure, new social movements, peace studies, and etc. And he has published many articles in very well-known and highly reputed national and international journals. And he was a Karnataka Sahitya Academy awardee. He obtained this award in 2011. He held many memberships in local and national committees of importance. To give a very few examples, he worked as a chairman of Honorable High Court Committee on Tribal Issues of Rajiv Gandhi National Park. He was a member of Textbook Development Committee in CERT, a past president of PUCL Karnataka. a member of Maulana Azad National Urdu University, Hyderabad. So the list runs very long of both his academic credentials and his public engagement. He has been and he still is a member and trustee of many advisory boards of important NGOs in Karnataka and elsewhere also. He has published many works. Among them, I would like to mention a few. Politics of Peasant Movement in Karnataka, Innondu Mukha, Identity Politics of Karnataka, Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, Critical Analysis in the Present Context, Human Rights Perspective and Social Justice, Identity Hagu Kalamanada Chintanegalu. His very recent much acclaimed work is Alpasankhyatur Mattu Jati Vyavasthe. That means minorities and caste. It was published in 2021. In the next year, in 2022, it has gone a brief introduction by Professor Muzaffar Assadi to speak to this audience. I extend a very hearty welcome from NSI South and from on the behalf of all of the audience present here. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Madhavi, and other members of the Socialist Collective. I'm absolutely new to this new Socialist Collective, honestly. I'm not engaged with this collective right from the beginning itself. Madhavi, when she asked me to deliver a lecture, I agreed. I mean, for the simple since he wanted me to talk about the caste among the Muslims. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear. Yes, sir.
I agree to speak on the Muslim politics and caste among Muslims, but later on it was changed to understand the contemporary issues of the Muslims as such, because you know that they have been the target, they have been the victim of the state politics. Now the whole question is that to begin with, what are the kinds of stereotypes that have been operating in Indian context? That's one thing we need to understand. Whether that stereotype is still continuing or it is taking a different, form as such. The second important thing is that when you look at the Muslims, can they be located as the subaltern classes? Because you know that if you look at the left writings of the left, left intellectuals and things, Muslims have been projected as a community rather than the subaltern classes in Indian context. I would say that they have become the subaltern classes in Indian context, but the process started much earlier. I'll get back to that argument a little later, from which period onwards they have become the subaltern classes. If that is a possibility, if that is the case, is it possible to bring in the caste categories into that subaltern classes? Is it possible to negotiate between the class and the caste in Indian context? I would say that I'll go back to the history, again to the colonial history and the pre-colonial history as such, and try to argue about the presence of the caste in Indian context among the Muslims, which has not been, discoursed, or which has not been narrated, nor it has been the major, what's called debate among the scholars, barring few sociologists in Indian context. Otherwise, hardly any political scientists or hardly any left intellectuals been talking about the caste among the Muslims. That probably new socialist movement has to take it up in case they wanted to address the issues of the Muslims in Indian context. The third important thing is that what are the major challenges? What are the major concerns? Whether the poverty is the major concern or the security is the major concern among the Muslims, or is it the development is the major concern, or ghettoization is the major concern? I think we need to differentiate between the stereotypes, the argument about the Muslims in Indian context. Probably we need to get into the, and finally, I think I need to get into the latest, the latest politics that's happening in the context of the South India, particularly Karnataka or Andhra, and Tamil Nadu or Kerala, because that we need to understand the difference between the Karnataka and South Indian politics vis-a-vis the North Karnataka, and where do you locate the Muslims as such, given the fact that there are reports after the reports which are giving some kind of satisfactory answers to some of the major questions of development or backwardness with regard to the South India as such. One thing you need to understand, couple of stereotypes. I would call them as the stereotypes rather than simply the arguments. There are arguments which now they have snowballed into major controversies as such. Let me take up the argument of Akbar. I think not the MJ Akbar. There was another Akbar who argued that the Muslims in Indian context have become what is called the guilty men of the partition. That has been the stereotype. They have been the guilty men in the sense that they were the ones who were instrumental in division of the party. Division of the India into two halves, Pakistan and India, because it was on the basis of the religion that the country was divided, and that's the reason why Muslims are being accused of being part of that one partition. That stereotype has been again and again constructed to stigmatize the community, to stigmatize the categories, saying that you are accountable for the partition of India. But if you go by the arguments, or if you go by the readings of the partition of period, one thing is that the partition was not the experienced, or not an experience, or what you call it was not the, because it was larger a textual experience of the South India rather than the actual experience of the actual experience felt by the South Indian Muslims. That's one important thing we need to understand, mainly because that whatever happened was in the case of the North India, who in fact argued for this partition. It was not the whole of the Muslims of India. Basically it was argued by the North Indian bureaucrat Muslims, big zamindars, and big industrialists or big capitalist classes and others. It was not these subaltern classes which demanded the partition of India, but they've been accused of. And for example, the Aligarh, even though it is the Aligarh Muslim University or the Aligarh school, which demanded, or which in the forefront, and the people like Jinnah and others, they were all basically it was a Gujaratis who demanded this partition rather than anybody else. When Jinnah was a Gujarati, the Gandhi was a Gujarati. Remember that one. One is divided, one is integrated, and both the independence. And also the present context, I don't want to mention that things, whatever it may be. So one important stereotype is that they are the guilty men of the partition. The second important thing is that their demands, their demands, basically the Muslim demands, were not too many. If you look at the argument that the Indian state made vis-a-vis the Muslim right from the beginning of immediately after the independence, it always tried to see that Muslims have very few demands, as if it is a universal demand. In fact, it was not the universal demand. For example, like the issues about the 370 article, they thought that it is reflecting the psychological feelings of the Muslims. No, it was not. It was not. It was basically the issues about the Kashmir. Kashmir is not the issue of every Muslims. Remember that one. But it was the major problem was that it was spread across. It was said that it is a problem of the Muslims, but it was not. That's one thing. 370 article, or take the case of the autonomy to the Aligarh Muslim University. Right from the beginning, it has been said that the the Aligarh Muslim University issues of the Muslims. Again, you have got a fallacy argument. At the same time, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan has been accused of being, separatist and other thing. Also he was the instrumental in establishing the Aligarh Muslim University. In fact, it was not the case. And the whole, the community was accused of being, supportive of the Aligarh and Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, or even the Maududi. No, it was not. Or they take the case of the, what is called the triple talaq. Triple talaq came again and again. Look at Shah Banu case, late 80s, when Shah Banu moved to the court on the issues of the anomaly to her immediately after the divorce. It was as if tribal talaq is the major issues of the Muslims. It was not. The percentage of the women who have been affected by this thing was very, very less when compared to any other thing, even though I stood by Shah Banu, sitting alone in the, board club, supporting her claim. But the way the whole question is that who was talking about this triple talaq? Was it, if it is the case of the feminists, okay, we are fine about that one. But it is the case of the right, which is talking about the triple talaq. And that's the reason why this triple talaq, in fact, the issue of the triple talaq, gave rise to the spaces where the right is to talk about or construct an argument, condemn the community, and stigmatize the community, that saying that they're all backward, they're anti-modern, they're not in favor of changes in their personal law. All these things. It is the issue about the feminism is the issue of the gender. Probably that would have been welcomed. But the thing is that it was occupied by, the space was occupied by the right. That's the major problem of the whole thing. There are other stereotypes. The community was stigmatized for the simple reason that the medieval history was again and again reconstructed. The memories of the medieval period. You begin with the Gori down to Tipu, which is not only constructed by these memories were again and again reconstructed by the colonialism, but also the post-independence Indian state or post-independence, intellectuals. I would call that the right intellectuals. Look at the culling the history or the memories of the medieval period, as if that the medieval period is full of pillages, pillage of what's called destruction. It is full of conversion, forcible acquisitions, all these things. Introducing the what's called the religious-based state. Including the fact that the state was completely converted into what is called top-down feudal states. I'm really surprised that even the left, like the Plekhanov and others, Ulyanovsky and others, Russian scholars, calling your Indian state, Mughal state. If I'm right, even the Hyderabad state also calling it as the top-down feudal state, as if it did not allow what's called the transformation taking place within itself, both in terms of the, in the case of the agrarian structures or in other case also. So it was a stagnated economy. It was absolutely stagnant economy, what Marx also said about it. Agrarian economy is completely stagnated. This is the reason why, if you read Marx also, you will find that the state was feudal, and also the whole economy was stagnant. And the whole Muslim, the Muslims of the current, or in the present context of the present period becomes accountable. They become accountable to the deeds of the medieval period. They become accountable for the partition of India. They become, accountable for the misdeed or pillage, conversion, other things of the medieval period. And what happens is that these stereotypes was not only constructed but also universalized. This is the reason why I'm now trying to use the category called the new untouchable category. Two things are quite apparent. One is the subalternity, the argument about the subalternity. The second important, from the subalternity, they move to the what is called the new untouchable categories now. Probably you might say that new untouchability is a part of the subalternity. Yes, that is true. But at the same time, you need to differentiate between the new untouchability and the subalternity. Subalternity is not only the concept of being, but also it's a subalternity is also the position that the community has undergone over the years. They are the touchable categories, in fact, in social life. They're socially, in terms of their socioeconomic relations and other things, in terms of their, locations, they've been, they can be considered the touchable categories. But how do you look at the new untouchable categories? They're like the new Dalits of the contemporary period. This is a perceptible shift that has taken place over the years. And in that particular context, two things we need to understand. Can you see Muslims as a single homogeneous lot? Or can you view them as what is called a category which is treated as single, but also culturally infused, an exclusive category, which is not prepared to open itself to the other world? Or whether it's this category, subaltern class category, is a closed category, which has not been able to co-opt other social relations, other social structures? Or is it what stereotypes, one of the stereotypes of the colonial writing is that they're all the conservatives, they are the religious bigots, where they are only the what's called the religious mongers, particularly when they were referring to the different categories like the Mapulas and others, and many categories, for example, many other social categories. They have been stigmatized, saying that they are basically, what is that called, the religious bigot, orthodox, they believe in hatredness and other things. How to construct this subalternity and in new, what is called the untouchable category? This is a process that has taken place over the years. In fact, we need to understand right from the beginning. I mean, you say subalternity is not the product of the post-colonial Indian state alone. Even though Indian state, right from the beginning, 1947, always talked about the 4 or 5 issues as the major issues of the Muslims, except when new Indian state came out with the Sacha committee, or what is called the Ranganath Mishra committee report, and followed by the other reports, Kundu committee report and other things. That suddenly they realized that the category, the Muslims have, they have remained backward, socially backward, economically backward, politically backward, and other things. But the thing is that the subalternity of a community began much earlier. I would call the process began after 1857. So up till 1857, they were a part of the ruling class. They were the ruling class. Whether, regimes, or take the case of the different structures, whether the Jagirdars, Zamindars, or any feudal lords for that matter, they were into this institutions like the judiciary. They are into the political administration. They are into these rural, structures and other things. That's the reason why, Pavlov and others, they call it as a feudal state, top-down feudal state, which never believed in what's called the new relations to, come up, or transformation of the rural economy to take place. They did not allow. Whatever it may be, up till 1857, they were the ruling class. After the power was transferred to the British government, because the colonial power, the policies that were introduced, that literally affected the community which was by then ruling. This happened likely in the case of the North India. I think the South India, particularly in the case of the Hyderabad, it remained with the Muslims after the 47, post 57 also. In the case of Karnataka, it stopped in 1799. I would say that was the beginning of subalternity. 1799, when the Srirangapatna collapsed, when Tipu Sultan lost power, the process of the subalternity began. In fact, between 1799 and 1883, they consistently lost the power in Karnataka. But the thing is that in 1883, if I'm right, 84, in fact, they were all categorized as the backward classes by the colonial, 1883, I'm sorry, because by then they had to hand over the power to the rural chieftain or the princely state. So by 1883, the power was lost. I mean, by 83, they literally became subaltern classes. There were reports in the context of the All India, particularly in the North India, Rogada Hutton report and others. And there are other also reports which say that by 1883, mainly because of some of the policies that the British colonialists introduced in Indian context, like when they made the land as a private property, they abolished the castes, they introduced the English because of the Macaulay, and with the revenue and cash and other things. So that was the reason why these Muslims as a ruling class were replaced by the non-Muslims. Most important, one of the important factors in the case of transformation that was taking place was the inability of the Muslim ruling classes to adapt to the new situation. I'll give one example. The example is that of education. In 1830, when the Britishers introduced English as a medium of instruction, replacing Sanskrit and the Persian as a court language or the administrative language, they did not adopt to that English language. They did not enter into the English, they did not enter into the institutions, arguing that English was nothing but a satanic language. That was against the basic principles of the religion or the faith. And in the process, they were the losers. And in fact, there are studies with regard to the Bengal. And if you look at by 1995 and also 1905, the number of Muslim representation in different structures of the power was lowest when compared to the other provinces. Lowest in this, this is mainly because that they could not be able to identify themselves or could not be able to absorb, copt the English, modern languages, and the knowledge system. Even though one cannot deny the fact that the colonialists right from the beginning. They were consistently stigmatizing the community. That's one thing. The second was that colonialism was consistently denying two things. One is the dialogue between the Indian knowledge system and the Islamic knowledge system. The third was that the colonialism was consistently, denying the production of the knowledge by the Islamic world. But Abyssinia, whether the scholars like the Abyssinia and others, they're not referred to, who translated the works of the Aristotle or others, Plato and others, and introduced them to the Western world. Paradoxically, Aristotle, Plato, and other thinkers were initially appropriated by the church, later on appropriated by the colonialism. And they projected their contribution, Plato and Aristotle. In fact, I would call this as a Christianization process, and appropriated and projected that is their own. Aristotle and Plato were the part of the colonial narratives, became part of the colonial narratives, and they were exported to the different parts of the world wherever the colonialism went. Basically to advance their argument that you need to have the city-state like Greek, or you have to have a kind of democracy. They thought that they were the precursors of the democracy, and they appropriated them. In the process, they completely denied, completely marginalized Islamic knowledge, the Muslim knowledge, as if Muslim knowledge doesn't exist. And that's the reason why the denial of space in the knowledge system, the consistent stigmatization of the community as a bigot, as intolerant, and other things, right from the beginning. So that all pushed them, they all marginalized this community. And that's the reason why a community which claimed to be a ruling class up till 1857 at the All India level, barring Hyderabad, suddenly lost everything, suddenly became marginalized, secondly became backward classes. So you have this process of subalternity, subalternization of the community taking place. And from there onwards, the community could not be able to come back to its original position. Even though one section might have participated, demanded what's called the separate state, but majority of the Muslims remained backward, economically and socially backward. In this context, we need to understand what are the kind of social structure. Did they speak in terms of the caste identities? Did they speak in terms of a single community? That's the most important for us. Because today, if you look at if you counterpose the same argument here in the contemporary period, probably you might understand the fact that today, Muslims have been projected as single homogeneous category. Take any documents of the state, except commission, backward class commission reports, or except the Ranganath Mishra Committee report or the Gopal Singh Committee report and others, wherein it tried to understand the different social categories, social structure that is existing. Otherwise, the state, and I think this is a kind of contradictory position one can visualize vis-a-vis the state. One side, the state constructing them as single, homogeneous, or they are the part of a single ummah, and creating a narrative about that one. This has been, carried forward by the, non-left groups in Indian context, including the left also does the same thing, that same mistake. And at the same time, new narratives have been created, which again, demoralizing the Muslims. For example, let me get back to that one, then I'll come back to the caste and other things. There's a consistent argument recent years being made, and that particularly when it comes to the question of the Ambedkar's views on Muslims. It is said that there are certain accusations, narratives have been built about Ambedkar vis-a-vis the Muslims. That has been used to construct a new narrative. This new narrative is to see that the larger alliance between the Muslims and the Dalits should not take place. The second is that this is a part of the creating a negative picture with regard to Muslims in Indian context. Like, for example, Ambedkar was against partition of India. More than that, the argument was that Ambedkar argued for the transfer of Muslim population from all the Muslim population from India to the Pakistan. This narrative is being built up, which has become a part of the Indian stereotypes. To claim that the Muslims should go back to should go to the Pakistan, for the simple reason that Ambedkar advocated Muslims to go there. If you read his text, Ambedkar's text, particularly the partition, Pakistan or the partition of India, I think that book, that text was basically a program written for his party, and which is a well-researched book. I would call it a pamphlet, a program, a pamphlet about advocating, understanding the nationalism in Indian construct, nation. And that's one thing. Second is argument about the partition itself. In fact, to make my argument very brief, I would say that if we read carefully the text, Partition of India, Ambedkar make a reference to the exchange of population, not the transfer of the whole population. What he tried to say is that to create a balance, even though he argues that the Muslims have become a nation by its historical, and he gives historical reasons for that, cultural reasons he gives, and he gives also the unwieldy nature of the federal system and other things. But what he is trying to argue finally was that to make these two systems to operate, the people living nearby the border areas, for example, like between Pakistan and India, if the Muslims live very near to the border areas, should be exchanged, should be transferred to Pakistan, and the Hindus should be transferred to India to make the balance, to operate the two nations in peaceful manner. He nowhere, but this kind of stereotyping has been created, constructed again and again. Or take the case of his argument with regard to the Muslim women, wherein he said that the women who are living inside the burqa, they don't, mentally grow, or they won't have the rational thinking, and they die without any kind of freedom and other things. Yes, Ambedkar did it. I agree with that fact. But you need to understand that while writing women, while writing about conversion, while writing about the conversion from Dalits to the Christianity, and while writing about the Ramayana and other things, Ambedkar was a researcher. He was a deep researcher. But there is one exception. While writing, he was not, in the whole text, one thing was absence. The absence of his reading about the original text. Probably his reading about the Islam came through the media. Some European readers, I don't remember his name, who had his own, stereotyping about the Islam. And Ambedkar used that word. But his reference to the Islam can be seen right from the first article written to the Columbia University, the caste, and followed by his article, his project work on the, I think, economic history, something of that kind, wherein he had expressed his, what's called he had his own positions about Islam, wherein he thought that Islam is, emerged out of the mercantile, I don't call it as a capital, mercantile category as such, because, he looked at the aspect of the trade as one of the important reasons why this religion emerged, whatever it may be. But this kind of stereotyping was constructed again. This is nothing but to, see that the community is again and again marginalized, again and again, stigmatized, again and again, become accountable to the past deeds. Again and again, has to, subserve the interest of the, or again, it was meant to create what is called the other from within itself. So this was finally is to see that the community becomes, a new untouchable category as such, which is apparent now. The whole question is that subalternity began in post 1850s, which continued to hog the politics in an Indian context. But the whole question is that did Muslims accept the fact of caste? Did it accommodate the caste? That narrative becomes an important narrative in the politics, in the contemporary politics. Look at the Pasmanda movement in recent years of the backward, the Dalit caste of the Bihar and other places. Do you have this caste identification as the marker of the Muslims in Indian context? Or is it simply the religion? See, imagine these two issues needs to be understood in the larger framework of the subalternity of the community. Look at the caste categorization. The caste categorization or the caste documentation or the caste classification or the caste reclassification started during the colonial period. Even though we might say that the 1871 census was the first census which identified the caste among the Hindu social order. But I would say that there is a kind of amnesia that prevailed in the narratives, in the intellectual discourses in Indian context. Our intellectuals, academic intellectuals, never try to understand the mentioning of the caste among the Muslims in the census report. Even though census report, beginning with not 1871 alone, but prior to that, when in 1869, particularly in the Oudh region, identified the caste. I'll come back to the Hyderabad also, how the caste were identified in the Hyderabad census reports, different Muslim caste. But the thing is that the project of identifying and listing the caste began in 1871 proper in almost all the regions. But there are a couple of arguments also here. One argument is that the colonialism was responsible for constructing the caste. And secondly, before that, we need to understand that colonialism advanced 7 theories, not less than 7 theories with regard to the caste formations. Look at out of that category, out of 7 theories, there is one important theory, is the Aryan invasion theory. Probably everybody is familiar with that one. 1830s, if I'm right, when William Jones, began to argue that 2 important languages of India, they are literally from the Syria. One was identified as the Muslim. In fact, it was wrong. Persian was identified as the Muslims. Persian, the classical Persian was largely the language of the Zoroastrians, which the later on Muslim, Islam appropriated, or the Muslim rulers appropriated in Iran or the Persia. But the argument is that since this Persian was a part of the court language, administrative language here, including the language of the Marathas or Mysore state and other. So it was identified largely with the Muslims. And then Sanskrit. Sanskrit was largely the language of the Aryans and other things. And that's the reason why Aryans largely came from Syria side and other things. Meanwhile, this theory of Aryan invasion, Aryan arrival, was projected as the reason, one of the reasons why the caste India's witnessed the caste formation. In fact, there is a subtle argument which has not been identified by the Indian scholars, is that even the arrival of the upper classes from the non-Asiatic world, Asiatic world, particularly from the Persia, Arab world, and other places, it also created a caste categorization among the Muslims. That's one theory which has not been explored much. For example, they say that the Sheikh, Sayyid, Pathan, and Mughals, when they came, they brought the social structure, hierarchical social structure. They brought the social distancing. They brought other categories along with them. For example, like the slaves they brought in. They brought the dancing girls and others. Military men, they also brought in. They practiced the same social structure in the Persian world. And they brought along with that, they brought this social structure to Indian context, which later on converted, which later on became part of the caste system. So the understanding that one theory that was advocated was that you have got these similar kind of argument, particularly Aryan invasion, Aryan argument. You have the upper class coming from the Persian world and forming the caste in Indian context. The second argument which the colonialists made in their narratives is that caste was the result of conversion. And before that, let me get back to the argument about the trade. How trade necessitated the formation of the caste. One important, there are many examples. I'll give one or two examples. One example is the example of what's it called, the Malabar region, particularly Zamorin's region. Zamorin had the trade business with the Arab world. But the problem is that he had no manpower to look after the ships. So he said that, he issued a farman asking for one person from a fisheries community, I think the Cheruman community, Perumal or Cheruman community, to become Muslims. Because they were the one who was considered as the untouchable as such, or the degraded community. Once they were converted, for the trade purpose, he could able to have the trade relation with the Arab world. That's the reason why the caste becomes the important component in the trade. Second was when the Arabs came to the same Malabar or to the Badkar in Karnataka, Arab traders married the local population. They became the hybrid communities. Populace were called as were actually the progenies of the Arab world, Arab men, and the local population. And the trade also led to the marriage of the Arabs and the Jains in Karnataka. Similar things happen in many places as such. And that created trade became a factor for the, caste. Third important thing is that, conversion. There are multiple ways of the conversion took place. One was basically, the Sufism. In that particular context, we need to understand whether the caste formation among the Muslims started with effect from the census reports or much earlier or much before the colonialism entered India. Is there something called the specific time period in which the conversion and the caste formation took place among the Muslims? Unlike the Hindu social order. Hindu social order has a imagined past. You call it as the beginning of the caste with the later Vedic period. Or that has been documented, Megasthenes of the Aryans and others, including Chanakya's, Kautilya's Arthashastra and others. But the conversion of the formation of the caste started much earlier to the colonial period. It began in the 7th century with the arrival of the Sufis, with the arrival of the military forces. Remember that when Sufism was much more convincing, given its, nature of syncretism, nature of syncretic culture that it advocated. There are a large number of Sufis whose advocacy about the social harmony, whose advocacy about the tolerant society, whose advocacy about dialogue between the different religion, basically Hindu religion and the Islam. Even though Sufism was seen as a deviant religion for many years, for up till the 10th century, but in Indian context it was not seen as a deviant, but it was seen as a part of the Islamic. In the other world, it was a part of the deviant world. But their tolerance, their philosophical nature, simplicity, simple lifestyles, their narratives, or what you call the miracles that they did, all this thing attracted huge crowd. And that crowd came from the backward classes, backward caste. Particularly take the case of the trading class, Khojas, Voras, and others. They were all converted, or Kunbi Patidars. They were all converted by these Sufis, and that's the reason why. But what kind of caste that they formed initially? There's in fact, there is no precise reading, but the thing is that they created what is called fuzzy communities, an obscure, identity. They are neither the Muslims, they are not the Hindus. For example, take the case of the Myos of the North India. They would say that they're all Muslims, but at the same time, they say that their family god is Krishna. There are many cases, like the Rajputs, Jats, Ahirs. You take any caste, there are political reasons also for the conversion. Leave apart, for example, the Rajputs. The Rajputs' conversion had a political backing, political reasons. Particularly, they wanted to retain their property. In fact, it reminds me about one incident, one issue that was reflected in the census report. In 1857, particularly in 1857. It says that the census report says that one category of, in a family, one person would become part of the Vidrohis. The another will join the British forces. This was mainly to protect the property. Even suppose you imagine if the Vidrohis win the battle, the property will remain. Similar was the case in case Britishers won the battle. So it's basically to retain the property. There is one important issue that has not been talked in the colonial narrative, how the caste was formed. The colonialists were responsible for the construction of the caste. If you go by the what's called the census reports, one thing is fairly clear. Even a small mistake while entering the names of the caste led to the formation of a new caste. For example, a small mistakes in the spelling, dot, also created caste. One example is the way the mir, M-I-R, the dot, I think the dot, while they are entering, they were using the Urdu language. One small dot changed the mir to the Muslim community. There are lots of mistakes that was committed. Whatever it may be, it is true that the colonialism documented large number of castes, but at the same time, caste did exist much before to the colonialism, which has not been talked about in Indian context. Take the case of the census of the Hyderabad state. Even though in 1887, it identified 1881, for example, 1881, it identified many castes among the Muslims, like Patwegas, Sonas, Pinjar, Bohra, Tambolis, Kartik, Kasai, Khoja, Memon, Momin. Look at other, there are certain castes which are basically, they're both Hindus and they're Muslims. For example, Patwegas, Dom, Bagban, Tamboli, Sonar, Teli, Mehta, they were found both in Hindus and the Muslims. And Mehta caste is found in both Sikhs and Muslim. Kalal caste found both among Jains and the Muslim. In fact, the Tambolis, Kanchanis were found in 3 religions: Hinduism, Islam, and Jainism. If you look at the way it constructed, may later on also, in 1911 census, if you look at, it had a new caste like the Julaha. It's a weaving caste. In fact, I need to go back to how the caste among the Muslims is different from the Hindu caste. Julaha is one important reason. I'm trying to look at them because, Julaha basically were the weaving caste in northern India, but in southern India, we found them in the case of Hyderabad state alone, but not in the Travancore or old Mysore. We never had these kind of categories. But in fact, one important features of this caste was that these castes tried to register not only caste, but also as the occupational categories. In fact, it was done by the Britishers. But sometimes what happens is that the occupation of occupation category might be different from the real caste. For example, the Sutar. Sutar is a carpenter category. But their profession was, their caste was different. But one thing is fairly clear, which is quite apparent in the case of the Hyderabad state also. Particularly when, there are 2 processes here. One is that many lower castes, which were converted. And in fact, there is no consistent methodology that the colonial census used to document the caste among the Muslims. Sometimes it used the foreign origin. Sometimes it used Asiatic origin. Sometimes it used what is called the local conversion or the hybridity of the caste. How the foreign marries the foreign and the progeny of the foreign and the local categories. So it used the different categories, methodology to understand the caste configuration in India. If you look at all the census, right from the beginning of the Bengal presidency to the Bombay presidency, the Madras, Baroda, Kashmir, they came out with the argument about the nomadic tribe. I'll have to talk about it. In fact, the colonialism also created new categories of the Muslims. For example, like they constructed a category called the criminal tribes. The large number of criminal tribes were documented in the case of the Punjab, Bombay presidency, and other places. With the passage of the Criminal Tribe Act, a person who is a habitual offender was castigated, and which was, his whole community was castigated as the criminal tribe. Similar line as that of the Hindu tribes. So you have got a caste category. You have the criminal tribe category, which includes the thugs. One category of the thugs became what's called the criminal tribes, or what is called they later on became a caste also. For example, like the Pindaris, they became caste itself by itself. Or there is another category that they created was the nomadic tribes. For example, large number of nomadic tribes were identified in the Kashmir, even the other places also. Even tribes were, I think in the case of the Maharashtra, the old presidency area, For example, like I forgot about the tribe. That tribe was, one part of the tribe was what became Muslims. That's the reason we have got a Muslim tribal community, like the Lakshadweep, where you have got all the Muslims, where the tribes. Or there is something called the animistic tribes also. It constructed a category, but its reference is very, very few. Only, I think there are one or two in the case of the Papri or something community. It's visible in the case of the Bengal. So you have got multiple layers of categories that the Britishers constructed, even though caste was pre-colonial. And its own mistakes has created the caste. And also it classified. But there are times when that does it mean that the caste categorization followed the same Hindu practices? There are both things operating among the Muslims. One is that flexibility. One is the flexibility and the mobility. Fact was there. Mobility and rigidity, flexibility and the rigidity, both operated. For example, who were co-opted as the Muslims, particularly from the backward caste, he can claim the status of a higher caste, like the sheikhs. There are instances wherein large number of Muslims, became sheikhs. And that's the reason why the upper caste, this is why I'm trying to bring it here, like the sheikhs, Sayyid, Mughals, and Pathans, who are called as the upper class or upper class. They're not the pure caste, or they're not the pure homogeneous class. Most of the four classes are basically non-Indian by origin. But the thing is that, but by the time they arrived, one thing is that they married off to the local population. The second important thing is that there are a large number of OBCs, backward caste, and others. They, appropriated the title of Sheikh, Sayyid, Pathan, Mughals, and other things. That's the reason why here you got a heterogeneous category. If they say that, look at the state now, right now also arguing that, there are 9 categories who are not being in the OBC list in the present context. On the ground that, I think 9 category probably, on the ground that they are the, original caste or the original class, they are the pure caste. For my theory, my argument is that none of them are the pure. Take the case of the Nawaz. The Nawaz are the hybrid category of the Arabs and the Jains. Sheikhs, they were the hybrid class of the Indian local population, Indian backward caste, including Dodekulas. And they converted and appropriated. And there are instances wherein the Sayyid position or the Sayyid title was appropriated by the lower caste. Title was not only appropriated but also given, depending on his, social status or the, monetary power. Anybody who is, rich, who can become the, claim the status of a Sayyid, the Sheikh, Pathan, this thing. So you have got the flexibility when compared to the Hindu social structure. You have the hierarchy and non-hierarchy as well. But there were categories who have been not enlisted, who have disappeared from the list. This is the paradox of the whole census reports. But for example, in 1921, if you look at the census reports of almost all the states, many castes which are enlisted, sometimes the number went beyond 300, the caste categories that was enlisted by the colonialism. And even it identified the subcaste. Even it identified its original caste, from which caste they came. For example, Khojas, they came from the Kunbi Patidars, Kunbi caste. Or other caste, they came from the different category. Large number of castes came from the Rajput caste or the Jats. It provided the statistics, it provided the numbers. I would call that one as the numbering the caste. It provided the numbering, it provided the social structure, social history. It provided this imagined history and constructed its own argument. And it also reclassified and reclassified. There are times when the community was also asked for the what's called the reclassification of the caste also. For example, in 1932, in Hyderabad itself, Hyderabad Nizam area, in 1932, for example, caste, Kasab caste, they demanded that that they should be enlisted as Are Katika class, or Kasab Lad, or Kasab Kasai. And they were all grouped. Under Rangres, they wanted to be, called as the Rangari category, something of that kind. There are castes they demanded, for example, Julahas, once they were asking for the categorization of Sheikh, whatever it may be. But if you look at, I don't want to get into deep into that issues again. One thing is fairly clear, the number of castes which are once enlisted, more than 394, and many castes. And they were enlisted, they disappeared. Many castes disappeared in the subsequent, particularly in 1921. And 1931, the number reduced. There was an argument saying that the Muslims should be projected not in terms of the caste. It was a general trend, but in the census, it was a time when they were asking, saying that the Muslims should be projected as the Muslims alone, not on the basis of the caste. Which does it mean that the caste disappear in the political political documentations, public policies? Here lies the two contradictory positions. One is that the state, look at 1931, we stopped census, and meanwhile you have got this caste information coming from the ethnographic studies, gazetteers, police records, and other things. One side the caste were categorized into different caste was differently defined. Whether they were defined in terms of the criminality. That season we have got a criminal tribes, criminal caste, and other things. But on the other hand, you have this argument about homogeneity of the caste, homogeneity of the religion, the community, and the difference within the community. But this project, it's a contradictory project, I would call it as. It's a colonial project, but it's the same project was carried forward by the Indian state. But what happened is that this is a problem with the academics also. This is a problem of the left intellectuals also. We also tend to see the homogeneity argument as the authentic argument, as a representative argument, rather than the differences. One thing is, the moment you agree to the fact that there are diversity, this diversity was argued by many, beginning with Al-Baruni, Baladuri, Al-Baruni, Ziauddin Barani, Shariar, and other scholars. We are not referring to them. We are not referred to them. So even though the diversity was accepted fact, even the text, original text also, makes reference to the differences, diversity. and also the inverse, conversion and other things. But we tend to look at the Muslims as a homogeneity group. That's the reason why the whole stereotyping about the Muslims always apply to the everybody, even though the whole community has become the subaltern community. The process of the subalternity is intensified after 1947, I would say. Even though the Sacha Committee report in 2005, if I'm right, tried to find out the differences between North and the South Indian Muslims and argue that the South Indian Muslims are far better when compared to the North India. Unfortunately, I would call it that fortunately, Sacha Committee report was the one report, even though Mandal Commission report also identified the caste. Kaka Kalekar Award also identified some of the caste, if I'm right. And different states also recognize the presence of caste. But in terms of the social policies, the Muslims are projected as a single homogeneous class. Look at the one important thing about the Sacha Committee report, that it identified the caste structures within the Muslims. For example, it says that there are three important categories among the Muslims. One is the Ashrafs. The second is the Ashrafs are the Ashrafs are the one who are basically from the upper class. The second is the Arzals, Ajlafs. The Ajlafs are the OBCs who are predominantly from the occupational category, occupational caste. So even after conversion, they retain the same occupation. Even they also retain some of the social practices of pre-conversion period. The third was the Arzals. For example, like the Dadekulas and others, the halal codes. They were treated, or they were seen as what's called the most backward, or the Dalit caste among the Muslims. And this is the reason why you got three important categories, which accepted by this Sacha Committee report. And this is when there is a debate taking place, particularly by Ranganath Mishra Committee report. Probably it is talking about the reservation of the Muslim Dalits among the Dalit category, giving the reservation to the Muslims. I think which was also later on talked by, a post-Sacha Committee report. Amitabh Kundu report also talked about it. Now the whole question is that in the context of these issues, identification cast by these commissions and the committees, but that has not been the major concern in the public narrative. In the public narrative, community becomes the major catch. Now, what happened to the caste? What happened to the community now? Whether the caste has been able to create its own space within the Muslim community. Even though our major argument is that this needs to be seen as a subaltern class. Can you fit these caste narratives or the caste categories into the framework of the subalternity? I think the number of castes that are asserting are very few. For example, the former, what's called the criminal tribe, like the Chapparban in Karnataka context, they've been demanding that they should be treated as the scheduled tribes, or repositioning themselves vis-a-vis the scheduled caste or something else. For example, like the Pinjars. Or there are other castes also, for example, like the Pasmandas, asking for the representation, asking for the, addressing their issues, educational issues and others. Similarly, in the case of the coastal Karnataka, you got what's called the Byaris. They were once the what's called the the merchant class, they were the petty merchant classes, economically most backward class. But now they are demanding more representation and other things. But the problem is here that the number of castes asserting themselves independently or autonomously in Indian context is far less, rather than as a community. But the major paradox is that the community is again pushed to the corner, marginalized, or again and again now stigmatized. Now, one thing is, we need to understand that why the community is far secure in the context of the South India when compared to the North India. That we need to understand. Second is that now the community is slowly transforming into what is called the new untouchable categories. Let me begin with the first one. Why the South India is fairly better when compared to the North India is because of the certain historical reasons. One historical reason is that, as I said earlier, South India never witnessed the partition. So we don't have the memories. South Indians never had the memories of the actual experience of the partition. South Indians basically had I would call it as a textual experience. Whatever we derived from the text. Probably, whoever has read Amrita Pritam or Sadakat Manto and others, we derive our experience from the Sadakat Manto or Pritam or Kushwant Singh and other. Their text becomes a reference point to understand the partition, its memories, its pain. So we never had this historical pain, historical baggage. So that prevented us becoming, prey to the Muslims becoming prey to the, communal politics. And that's the reason why South India is far better. Second was that the security culture that was created in Karnataka, in South Indian context. Every village has got the memories of a Sufi and the healing tradition. It also had the third important thing, it is followed by that one also. It had what is called the Bhakti movement. Bhakti movement created a secular space. Syncretism, Sufism created a syncretism, brought two categories, brought two religions together for a close rapport, for a dialogue between them on the issues of living together or issues of the tolerance. All these things, that's the reason why this particular South India remained far better when compared to the North India. The third important reason was that South India never had the memories of the severe pillage or the destruction or the forcible conquest, barring one or two exceptions. We never had this kind of experience in this. And that's the reason why the memories were not reproduced, never constructed or reconstructed in the context of the South India. This is why, and most important thing is that we had the tolerant, benevolent states, regimes. Whether Travancore, which was one of the first states to introduce, one of the first states, not the first states to introduce affirmative action, reservation policy. Or then we had this Kolhapur state, which is also again one of the first states to introduce reservation policy, followed by old Mysore state. And you have got the Mulki system being, brought in by the Hyderabad state. So these states have become very inclusive states. Introduced, accommodated, co-opted many social categories into the political system. That's the reason why when, for example, this has an effect in the reservation movement also. For example, take the case when the Mandal agitation took place. South India was burning, literally burning, but North India was absolutely calm. This was mainly because, South Indian states had the history of accommodating the categories. South Indian states had the, history of providing affirmative actions, providing reservations, providing, places to the different categories among the Muslims, among the Hindus, among the Dalits and others, even though Dalits were all given the what's called the constitutional reservation much earlier, right from 1947, I would say. But others were added into that one, as not as the religious categories, but as the socio-economic categories. Remember, this year, the categories, Muslims were treated as the socio-economic categories rather than the religious categories. This is the reason why Muslim could able to participate in the political process, could able to be, part of, the dominant narrative, and also they became part of this political development in South India. That's the reason why when you read the Saja Committee report, you feel that South Indian Muslims are far better than North India. But the paradox is that the community now has been, at the crossroad. Now it's being facing the problem of in a couple of things. Now the whole question is that now in this particular context, how they become marginalized, how they become what is called neo untouchable categories. Suddenly the project of constructing a, I would call it a Hindu state, what it may be, it has created a ripple. It has created its own narrative about the Muslims. And that has created, for example, it created a narrative that one should not bargain with the Muslims, one should not shop with the Muslims, one should not, sit with the Muslims. It happens in the case of coastal belt. There is the argument saying that one should not go to the, shops for hair cutting. One should not, provide the spaces for the Muslim to establish their shops in the, in the festivals. And one should not, you have this, argument about the halal cut. One should not, buy the mutton from the Muslim, kasais. All these things are, and also this is not simply restricted to the, economic issues. Even this is also translating into the, what is called the political issues. You remember the issue saying that the topi, the identity markers like the topis, dadis, the sherwanis, they become, anathema to the public gaze. The moment they are seen, they are being branded. They are seen, the moment they are, in a meeting, they are seen in a particular convention or the, big rally. That becomes a counterproductive. So the third important thing is the space. So there is now what is called the ghettoization taking place. Muslim, concentrated areas, even though Saja Committee talks about it, you have got a new forms of ghettoization taking place even in the urban areas also. You have got the, flats, exclusive flats for the Muslims becoming a fact. Or in the case of in some state where the flats were denied to the Muslims. So you have got this new form of ghettoization taking place. And at the same time, you have got this new form of untouchability taking place. And this is the major problem of the Muslims. And that's the reason why they are becoming other within the political narratives as such, and the political discourses also. Now, the whole question is that which becomes an important issue in the present context. Now, for example, like the whole argument is that Muslims are suffering from, developmental deficit. Muslims are, suffering from what is called the, it's not only development deficit alone, but also they are suffering from the other deficits. Poverty. For them, the poverty has become the major issue. I would say that this is called contrary. For them, the developmental deficit is not the major concern in the present context. One is that when you're talking about the developmental deficit, you try to, look at the Muslims as the most backward, most, ghettoized communities. But I would say that the developmental issue is not the major concern. Even poverty is not the major concern, because of the reason why I'm trying to give the reason is that Muslims born as poor people in poverty, stark poverty, they experience the poverty, they live in the poverty, and finally they die in that poverty. And poverty is everyday affair for them. And that is that more than the poverty, I think the most important issue is the security, physical security. That's one thing. The second is that untouchability becoming most important, second important principle, challenge that the Muslims they are facing now. The third, the baggage of history that they have been carrying. It's really the challenge for them to overcome. How to overcome the historical baggage of destruction and the pillage and the partition. And the last one is the diversity, problem of the diversity. Reclaiming the diversity as well as placing that diversity with the state and asking for the more representation, asking for the state resources for their benefits. And that becomes a major problem. First important is the, security, the physical security. Given the fact that every communal riots have pushed them back to the 30 years. Every communal riots have made them more and more marginalized, more and more insecure, physical insecurity. And the physical insecurity has expressed in different forms. Even what's called the food culture has become become a part of the larger threat to the community. So food culture, the other things also become part of your narrative and also become a problem. So physical security becomes the most important, even though the ghettos, it is said that ghettos provide them the sense of security. And beyond the ghettos, out of the ghettos, once they come out from the ghettos, the social, it's a security, physical security, that becomes the most important. That's the reason why poverty is not a concern. Developmental deficit is not a concern. And that's the reason why security becomes the most important challenge of the community in this present context. Second important thing is that how to, come out from this, narratives of history. There is a stereotyped arguments, stigmatized communities, marginalized community. And also you have got the construction of the other, Muslim as the other, and the Muslim as the new untouchable. Is it possible to reconstruct the whole narrative? Is it possible to see that they become a part of the larger narrative of the development, larger narrative of the Indian, state, wherein they do have the possibility of spaces? Will they, occupy the spaces which is lost for them, both in terms of the representation, in terms of locations? Is it possible to reconstruct? Is it possible to provide them the spaces? That becomes a major problem. That becomes a major challenge for the Muslims in India, because the spaces have been either closed or been negated. And this negation needs to be, reconverted. How is it possible to, change the paradigm? Is it possible to bring a new, language of politics, wherein they can be a part of the, given the fact that they are the 14%, given the fact that they were lived in history in India, even after the partition, they are the, the logic of caste, which is operating among them, says that they literally belong to this country. Only a few percent of the population, they might be from the foreign, but 99% of the Muslims of India, they literally belong to India. They do practice the caste. They do engage with the social system. They do have some of the practices from the pre-conversion period. So if you look at them as an Indian, as an indigenous, as a local, and also belong to the different structures, is it possible to create a space for them? It is not simply the politics alone. It is the cultural space. It is a social space that's required. I think there should be a kind of paradigm shift, and also the understanding about the Muslims not as a homogeneous lot, not as simply those asking for the representation, but beyond that. And there is one more issue that is most important: identity issues. The moment you say that you are a Muslim, you are castigated, you are stereotyped, you are stigmatized. Is it possible to reconstruct a new identity in terms of the caste, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of the tribalism? That identity has not been constructed in Indian context. I think this is the major task. I mean, this is the most important task that the new left has to take it up. It is not simply looking at the whole thing in terms of the class alone, even though I argued that this community needs to be seen as a subaltern class. But within the subaltern, you have got the category called the Muslim caste, or what I call it as a Zat Muslims. And the whole analysis has to begin with understanding the differences. So you got the argument about the multiple Islam. Like, for example, you have got the argument about the folk Islam, tribal Islam. I would call it, that's another Islam called the Zat Islam. Zat is nothing but a caste, Jati Islam. That needs to be brought in here. That needs to be taken to understand the other issues, whether the security issues or other the identity issues or other historical memories issues. Otherwise, what happens is that the Muslims in Indian context, they'll be again and again marginalized. They will remain as the most unrecognizable categories, and most important is that they will remain as other, both from within and without. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for this very rich description as well as explanation of the formation of Muslim multiverse, if one may allow to call it that way, because it's not just universal, one single identity. There is a multiplicity, plethora of multiplicity of identities within Islam, and also the process of subalternizing and imposed homogenization on Muslims across the country. The way you brought the internal tremendous diversity of Indian Muslims, and the problems challenges it will pose in organizing them. To start with the question answer session, I take this opportunity to ask few doubts I have. One is, while agreeing that, as you yourself made it clear, that caste existed before colonialism, but colonialism also intervened in its own fashion in categorizing, even through some of its blunders, how it constructed new caste categories, not only in the social order, also within the Muslim society. And also at the same time, in its ethnological moment and its census moment, it is recognizing various communities with various castes within the Muslims, and at the same time, as a colonial state policy, it is homogenizing and universalizing one kind of imposing one kind of a homogeneous identity on Muslims. That contradictory moment you beautifully brought forth, and how the Indian state after independence also willy-nilly continued the same policy while recognizing the differentiation within Muslims, and at the same time always considering Muslim as a homogeneous community. That policy, how independent state continued that policy, you brought that forth. But here I got it out. Apart from the colonial policy and also Indian state policy, in the period of national movement, even post-independence, when the Muslim political leadership is trying to organize Muslims, won't they also face the same dilemma? While on the one hand, they have to organize Muslims as a political bloc, then they have to find some form of unity, which will bring all the different castes together on one single identity or one single platform. And while demanding affirmative action or developmental action, welfare action for various downtrodden Muslims, they also have to bring forth the various differentiations and hierarchies that existed in the Muslim society. Don't you see a dilemma that will come even before the political leadership of Muslims and how they respond to it? Should they consider Muslims as one single political bloc for political purposes? For other social economic survival and developmental issues, they need to consider the internal differentiation of the Muslims. Will it not pose a great challenge for them too? Or this problem can be resolved easily? So these are some kind of a doubt I have.
If you look at different political parties that were formed either recent years or the post 1990s, or before that, like in Kerala, you got a Indian Muslim League and others. Or you take the case of the SDPI, which has been accused of being too, communal. Or you got a welfare party, and I think even the Pasmandas, they have formed a party or something, whichever it may be. But two things are quite obvious. One is that political parties are recognizing the multiplicity of social structure within the Muslims. Like, for example, Mayawati tried to do it last time, not this time. Even this time also she did it, but which is not very, very clear. Like, for example, in the case of immediately after the Akhlaq case, Akhlaq, you might be knowing about the case, and subsequently the election time, she tried to give the tickets to the lower caste Muslims, thinking that they are the authentic voice of the Muslims and they constitute the majority and other things. Even though she did not succeed in that, but she recognized the importance of the diversity within the Muslims, depending on the caste structure operating in a particular locality. Probably this might have worked in the context of the Bihar by the different political parties. But not in Karnataka and other places, they have not done. For example, while the national parties, while distributing the tickets, they would variably look at the Muslims as a as a homogeneous category. Whether it's the Congress or even the BJP, but the Congress basically. This is one side. Second side is the Muslim parties. Like for example, in the case of the your own Hyderabad OSC party, I do not know whether my reading about the OSC is that he is at any cost trying to expand his social basis. Okay, trying to project himself that he is a voice, the voice of the community. Not a voice alone, but is the voice. Or you might call it as using the subaltern argument that he wanted to be an agency between the state and the community. That's the reason why I don't think he'll go into the intricacies of the caste. His project is different. His project is, given the fact that he cannot capture the power, okay? When he capture the state power, whether the central or the state, your region, he cannot. But the thing is that you want to be an agency for the community. So there was a time when the Gandhi also acted as the agency of the community. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was also an agency of the upper class Muslims. But here, if you look at the other parties, like a welfare party or this SDPI and other things, if you look at their social basis, like for example, the SDA party's social basis come largely from the marginalized categories. For example, like the rag pickers, rickshaw pullers, and others. But they do also see the community and they try to project that they are the representative of the community rather than the representative of each caste, each differences. That's the reason why in their narrative, whether it's a overseas narrative, SDPS narrative, IUML, Indian Union of Muslim League narrative, even though Muslim League, you have got the upper Koyas, not the Koyas alone, Tangals and others, they are controlling. But in their narrative, Muslims become a dominant narrative, not the Muslim caste. While they are constructing a narrative, they would not exhibit any kind of contradictions, any kind of ambiguity. For them, the community becomes a dominant narrative, dominant issue than the caste. This is the reason why some of the caste, they don't get their representation even in the parties. Their issues are not reflected in these particular parties. Look at their political agenda, political manifestos. It never speaks about the caste differences. It never speaks the diversity. It never speaks the ethnicity. So that's the reason why these caste narratives are absent in the context of the India, except in the Lakshadweep. I would say Lakshadweep, it is not the caste narrative, but it's a tribe narrative, because all the Muslims are the scheduled tribes. So that's the reason why tribal narrative becomes a part of the political manifesto. Probably it might be seen in the context of the Kashmir also, because you have got the nomadic tribes. Nomadic tribes issues might be a part of their narrative. But that doesn't mean that caste get into the political manifesto. But the projection is that the projection of the community is that it is the monolithic community. That's a paradox. You have the paradox, but at the same time, there are exceptions, with regard to the Kashmir and the Lakshadweep, where the narrative becomes specific to the locality. Other places, no.
అన్న డానీ అన్న మీ మైక్ పనిచేస్తుందా ఇప్పుడు? పనిచేస్తుంటే ప్లీజ్ you can ask the question, or you can just type. If your mic is not, for some reason is not working, you can type the question in the chat box so that I can read. While people are trying to, anybody please want to raise an issue or question? Ramani, please go ahead.
Thank you for a very good presentation. I am having just two curiosities. One is in the recent years, we are seeing this Hindutva politics are rising day by day. So because of this rise of Hindutva politics, we are watching some of the educated Muslim people who were liberal previously, they are becoming more and more religious day by day. So how that is becoming a problem. One of the problems.
There is a difference between the religious becoming religious and the communitarian.
Yes. Yes.
Let me communitarian.
Let me complete my question.
Okay.
And they are becoming more religious, but not communitarian. But they are going far from the progressive ideology. So it is becoming difficult for propagation of the progressive ideology. But it is not their fault. They are becoming, because as you said that there is a physical security problem. So they might be shifting somewhat from progressive to religious type. So how can we address this issue? And another thing is many of the Muslims who are, as we know that they are very poor, they are also economically weak. But if we compare, for example, I will give the example from my, as I am working in bank, two sub-staff are there. One is from SC background and another is from Muslim Pathan. But economically, both of them are on equal footage. But still, they are behaving in adverse way with each other. This SC person is not liking that Muslim guy, and the Muslim guy is also always speaking against the SC persons, as if they are grabbing, because of the reservation, they are grabbing all the things and like that. So how can we address this type of issues? How can we bring the harmony between the people, especially who are in economically lower status?
Well, yeah, I think the first question, I'll give an example. The Muslim boys are becoming part of the religious narratives, right? That's what you are trying to say. I would say that more than the religious narratives, more than falling back onto the religion, they are falling back to the communitarian identities. They are becoming more and more Muslims, more than they are becoming more and more Islam. This is because of the perceived threat, perceived insecurity feeling, a perceived nature of the politics, threatening politics, and the perceived threat about the instability of their socio-economic life. So they are falling back onto their community life and try to reassert themselves. So what happened is that they go back to this might be the expressed to the matter of the symbolism. Like, for example, let me tell you about the hijab. You might have heard a lot of debate taking place about the hijab. In fact, the hijab came in, I would say that in coastal belt, wherein it all started in Karnataka. It started in 1990s. The people started wearing the hijab. So it came as a reaction against the modernity. It was, hijab became a part of the social life of the girls as a part of new identity marker. It was a part of opposition against the Western civilization, which was, by then it was trying to attack the Islamic world and other things. So it was seen as hijab as a marker of protest. But because, even though it is a marker of protest, they could be able to appropriate the modern knowledge system. For example, hijabdaris, they become doctors, engineers, lawyers, they become everything. They could be able to reach out to anything. But the thing is that in the old society, the other society, try to project this hijab as the mark of revivalism, mark of obscurantist practices, mark of uncivilization. But they never understood that the hijab was also a mark of the protest. It worked within the framework of the religion, but it was a mark of protest as an antidote to the Western modernity. You could see the large number of hijab wearing women also driving the cars and other things. But they were opposed to the Western civilization and other things, whatever it may be. But in the context of Indian context, the other part of the world, other part of India, large number of Muslims, they are becoming more and more communitarians. They are trying to look at the Muslim as a community rather than the religion, because they know very well that the argument of religion under threat is a false narrative. Even though you might say that, if you say that somebody is saying that religion is under threat, which is a false narrative actually. It is not the religion which is under threat, but it's the community, which is the category. It is a social category, which is under threat. It is my life which is under threat. It is my family which is under threat. It is my cultural practice which is under threat. Because my cultural practice is not homogeneous. In fact, when you talk about the culture, what constitutes the culture? What exactly is the Islamic culture? Whether it has a dress code? No, it doesn't have a dress code. Does it have a homogeneous practices, like for example halal? Halal can be anything which is permissible. Even the vegetarianism is also halal. Non-vegetarianism is also halal. My cultural practice goes beyond the eating, flesh, mutton. Even eating vegetable, eating egg is also part of my culture. So my culture practice is not the Nizami culture alone. My culture is a local culture also. So, but my living, my being as a human being, my existence is under threat, under constant threat, under surveillance. So that's the reason why I try to fall back onto the community, not on the religion. Religion is a much larger. Religion spread across different parts of the world. You cannot say that religion is under threat, but it is a community, it is an individual, it is a family which is under threat. That's the reason why people fall backing onto the community. And that's the reason why I say that there is an argument of the communitarianism rather than the religion as such. The second argument is that, is it possible to have negotiation between the Dalit and the Muslim, even though they are economically almost the same, drawing the same salary? Drawing the same salary doesn't mean that it has brought the economic equality. It has not brought the social equality. Economic parity in terms of salary is not the final solution for the problems. It is the issue about the perception about the exploitation. the perception about the primary contradictions, the perception about the ideology which is operating, which is the dominating. And these kind of things are literally, distancing communities, individuals from dialogue. For example, the perception of the, if a Dalit perception is that the Muslims have historically segregated them, or the perception is that ideologically there is a perception saying that Muslims were responsible for the Dalitization of the Dalits, then obviously you cannot have the dialogue. If both the community, both the people, they feel that both are victims of the system, both are exploited by the system, both are equally, historically suppressed, marginalized by the system, then the possibility of negotiation between, or the dialogue between the two is possible. Otherwise, the dialogue cannot take place. That's the reason why. And the second important factor that are influencing them. A Pathan cannot dialogue with a Dalit. The Dalit cannot dialogue. But what are the factors that are influencing them? What are the ideological forces that are impinging on them? If you make the analysis of that one, the factors, the historical factors, the cultural factors that are impinging upon them, and the commonality of the victimization, commonality of the exploitation, probably they will come together for a larger debate, the larger dialogue. And most important thing is that, do they have an icon which can brought them to the dialogue? For example, Dalits have got an icon, right? Ambedkar has an icon. Where is the Muslims icon? Can you have the Razakar as icon? No. Can you have the Nizam as icon? No. Can you have Maulana Azad as an icon? Yes and no. Because we have, Azad has not been accepted by each and everybody. He has not been projected as the icon of the Muslims. He has been projected as the icon of the liberal nationalism. If he's been appropriated by the Muslims as a post-independence liberal nationalist, and the post-independence, the state builder, and Ambedkar as the post-independence nation builder, despite the fact that both belong to the different streams, ideological streams. One was a bitter critic of the Congress, and the other was the president of the Congress, known as he was known as the subservient to the Congress interest. If you bring both together, the possibilities dialogue can take place. That dialogue can filter down to your Dalit colleague and the Pathan colleague. But we are not being able to make any effort to that. That's a paradox.
There is a question in the chat box. It's a question posed by Mr. Khan Yazdani. He is a senior journalist and writer and critique of Telugu lands. He's posing a very concrete question. It goes like this. BJP tried to divide the Muslim fraternity in the past through using the categories of Shias and Shias, through fraternity through Shias, and then through Sufis and women. Now they are now moving the BC Muslims in the name of Pasmandas. Will this dividing strategy yield results in 2024 elections?
In fact, in Hyderabad conclave, I don't think Modi ji has said that, he did not mention about the Pasmandas, which has been interpreted actually. He said that we should include them in our politics, the marginalized community. We should reach out to the marginalized communities. So the interpretation, articles appeared in the Hindu, article appeared in a large number of newspaper, they tried to project that the Pasmanda was, he was referring to the Pasmanda. In fact, in Hyderabad, there is no category called the Pasmanda, if I'm right. Pasmanda is basically Bihar category. See, the BJP, yes, it tried to reach out to the Shias. No, large number of Shia are supportive of the BJP. That is true. Sunnis are not there. You need to understand. Sunnis are the dominant force in India. Majority of the Muslims in India belong to the Sunni. They are not with them. Paspandas are not with them actually. Now, by interpreting that we should reach out to the marginalized and the party should become more inclusive, it was interpreted that the Pasmandas should be the backward caste or the Dalits should be the part of the Hindutva discourse. It is not so easy. For the simple reason that BJP, as of date, has not given a single ticket to the Muslim in the last election, if I'm right. How many Muslims have been elected to the legislative assemblies from the BJP? How many backward class Muslims been made the judges, level in the judges, or the part of the different political structures? I think, it's almost nil. You are now, given the fact that its political position is that Muslims, without Muslims, he can come back to power. Remember that one. It said, we don't want the Muslim votes because it believes in the polarization. Polarization is the major agenda, major strategy employed. When it talks about the polarization, it talks about the two need polarization. The Muslims as well as the Hindus, okay? Not the polarization within the Muslims. But there are other political, there was somebody who was telling to me in Karnataka. Let me give you the example of the Karnataka. Now, they were saying that in Karnataka, BJP will not have any problem in coming back to the power. What? The question was asked to one of the leaders. He just told to me by somebody else. He said that in the current, if the election takes place, BJP will not get the power, will not come back to the power. This is definite. But the thing is that we don't want to break our head for the, getting, majority. We'll invite OSC to Karnataka. That's enough. Look at the argument, okay? Let the OSC come here. We'll make it a point that he'll come here. We'll ask him to give 4 or 5 places to deliver the speech. That's enough for us. That will consolidate the Hindu vote. Look at using the strategy of inviting, not dividing the community, but inviting, because this would consolidate the votes, Hindu votes vis-a-vis the Muslim votes. Or fielding the Muslim candidate, pay them 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees, field a Muslim candidate in the Muslim locality, irrespective of the fact that he belongs to any caste within Muslims. We'll come back to power. It's easier for us. That's what he told me. I think that is also the strategy. Breaking your head to reach out to the marginalized Muslims or the backward Muslims and consolidating them. It's easy to invite somebody who can consolidate the Hindu votes rather than dividing the Muslims and reaching out to them, because it treats labor, different kind of labor. It treats different kind of strategies. Then inviting somebody else who can divide, who can consolidate the Hindu votes vis-a-vis the Muslim votes. That's what I think that's a politics that has been employed here in Indian context, even in the regional context also. Look at one accusation about why Uttar Pradesh was given the plateau was the same reason. It was a consolidation of the Hindu votes by inviting somebody else, allowing a space, giving the space. Same thing happened in the case of the Bihar. You don't require to reach out to the marginalized categories. That's a political strategy that's been employed.
I would like to ask another question, which can be called not very immediate and very concrete, immediate sense, but a larger historical question. Like in case of Jewish community, 18th century or 19th century, who are also continuously tormented, marginalized, ghettoized, and frequently attacked for political purposes.
What is that?
Sir?
What is that question? What is it exactly?
No, I'm just saying that the Jewish community in Europe in 18th century, 19th century continuously experienced this systematic marginalization, ghettoization, and violent attacks for the political purposes by the respective states. Whenever there is a political crisis, they used to keep Jewish community as the other and provoke the majority communities against them and all that. And despite all those provocations and violent attacks on them, while trying to understand, while trying to survive the hard situations, we also see a kind of an enlightenment movement within them. We all know Haskalah movement, and even though it's not in the sense that rejected religiosity altogether, while keeping religiosity, at the same time they were trying to engage with the modernity and want to modernize their own community to keep them abreast with the developments that are happening historically around them, as a matter of surviving and also developing their own internal capacities to respond. Can we see any possibility of such an effort, and are there any difficulties for such an effort if anybody tries to do that within the Indian Muslim community?
Yeah, this is a debate actually taking place within Muslims also. It is posed in this way: why there is no Nobel laureates among Muslims, except one or two? Why there is no scientific or patents, large number of patents by the Muslim scientists? Why there is no what's called the invention, large number of new invention by the Muslim scholars as such? This has been the major debate taking place within the community as such. But meanwhile, your argument is, I agree with that one. Persecuted community, even in the Indian context, like the Parsis were the persecuted community. Even the Sindhis, they were the persecuted communities. They came to India. They did the business. They became one of the topmost industrialists. They became one of the topmost, despite the fact that they don't have the state, or although they constitute the nation, they became one of the best known community in India. There are other communities also, this kind of persecuted community, but there are certain communities which remained marginalized despite the fact that they were persecuted. Like, for example, gypsies. During the time of the Second World War, before the Second World War, they were also called the Romas in Romania. They all became the persecuted communities. But the interesting fact is that the persecution of the Jews were projected as a problem of the universe rather than the Roma's problem. They never heard they were not documented. They were not, brought to the, the center stage of the narratives. But leaving apart, then the question remains, why Muslims, despite the billions of population, despite spreading across different parts of the world, are not being able to be, what's that called, contribute much to the scientific world? I would say that there are different regimes. In fact, if you look at the history of Islam, I think that between the 8th and the 12th century of Spain was treated as the period of the Renaissance in Islam. Because it was conquered, then you have got the Renaissance of the Islam in science, in philosophy, in mathematics, astronomy, name anything. It was at the pinnacle. And that contribution was either suppressed or either negated or either kept in dark by the colonial forces later on. Remember that the Muslim world after 1920, after the disintegration of the Turkish world, the Islamic contribution came down because you have got large number of states emerging which are either conservative. So you have got word called political Islam emerging, then religious Islam emerging, and multiple Islam emerging. Some of the regimes were orthodox, some of them were conservative, some of them were liberal, some of them were namesake liberal kind of thing. But science, unlike the church also did not allow the scientific temper immediately. Remember that one. It's also persecuted many of the scientists. Look at the Galileo or others. It never agreed to some of the theories, scientific invention as well as theories. Now also between Adam and Eve theory and the Darwinian theory, church would also support the Adam and Eve theory only because it belongs to the text. So you have the orthodoxy still operating in the midst of this liberal argument. But one thing is that it provided the space for the Renaissance much more than the Islam. Islam also saw the Renaissance, openness also. Look at the debate took place between the 5 schools of Islam, Hanbali, Maliki, and other 4 or 5 schools. Or take the difference between the Shias and the Sunnis. It was not the sectarian differences, but also the, in a way, ideological also. Or take the case of the liberation theology, which is engineer, Asghar Ali engineer talked about liberation theology. Theology provided ground for the new scientific invention. Otherwise, the Pakistani scientists would not have able to do the experiment and got the Nobel Awards. Or otherwise, the Bangladesh, what is his name? He would not have got the Nobel Award for the small saving, the self-help groups. There are instances. Because there are spaces for the liberalism, there's spaces for the conservatism also. Or take the case of the Middle East. Middle East is a paradox, a state of paradox. You have the capitalism and the feudal structure operating and coexisting. It also, now look at the medieval Middle East. Now they are sending, what's called the astronauts to the orbit. Now they are giving more focus on the science. So Islam, one side has provided a space which has not been appropriated properly. At the same time, which has consistently engaged with the conflict with the West. That's the reason it has not been able to sustain itself. For example, the whole debate about the clash of civilization. Remember that. Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilization, which literally divided the world into the Islamic world and the Anglo-Saxon world, which ultimately led to the war on Afghanistan. It's not a simple war. Remember, war on Afghanistan, war on Libya, Iraq. This led to the war. It was not simply the war on them, it is a war on the whole Islamic world. And these are coming in the way of creating the spaces. Again and again, regimes falling back onto the orthodox arguments, going back to the memories of the Crusade War, of four Crusade War of history. Whatever it may be, what I'm trying to say that there are spaces available. For example, in the Bangladesh, the space was available. That's the reason why women prime minister becomes the prime minister. Women become the prime minister again and again in an orthodox country. Pakistan, despite the fact that it's a military-controlled state, again and again, women participating in the political society and also become the chief prime minister. And the civil society is very vibrant. Or take the case of the Indonesia, Muslim women becoming the president or something else. So there are spaces for these things, liberation theology, spaces for the scientific tempo. But the only problem is that they are not been able to cut across the boundary, but come out with the cutting edge knowledge. That's a major problem. Probably some of the stereotypes still operating. Some of the historical memories also operating. Some of the efforts, they're being concentrated more on the Western confrontation rather than developing scientific tempo. That's all coming in the way of a progressive Muslim. Let me honestly agree to that one. Progressive, liberal, secular and the Muslim is a contradictory term. What if it may be secular, open-minded, the Muslim? But for example, in Indian context, I would say that India is much more open, even though despite the fact that the Muslims are living in the constant fear, constant security feeling and other things. The Indian state, Indian democracy provided them the ground. You have the scientists, you have the best example is the APJ Kalam kind of people. But his contribution to the nuclear technology is much more, actually, it is recognized. There are more unrecognized Muslims as well in the scientific field. There are Muslims who have been contributing to the knowledge system, which is quite possible in a liberal democracy, more than the conservative society. For example, why the nuclear scientist in Pakistan was condemned? Just because he belonged to a sect called Ahmadiyya sect. Ahmadiyya sect was seen as a deviant sect. It is not a mainstream sect. That's the reason why he was condemned. I would call it the way the trial took place about him, even though he was a Muslim, but he was condemned. But he did the contribution to make Pakistan as a nuclear country. Look at the Bangladesh, even though it says that it's an Islamic state, but it was more of a Bengali state. I would call it a Bengali state with a Bengali culture, which believes in the intellectual development. More than the religious state. It was more than a religious, it's a language state. It was based largely on the Bengali culture and the Bengali language. Bengali, that's the reason why Rabindranath Tagore's one song becomes a language, the songs of the state language of the Bangladesh. Can you imagine a Muslim world, Muslim country, adopting the songs of a non-Muslim, and it become, and there are, chairs or the centers in the heart of the Bangladesh. For example, in the Dhaka University, I would call it as, it was not an Islamic state; it's a more liberal state. It was a Bengali state, and that's the reason Yunus could able to do large number of work among the Muslims, among the poor people, and that was space created, and that's the reason I say that Muslim can work with the liberal state, with the state providing the spaces, and where the liberal knowledge can be appropriated, which can be translated into scientific tempo. In a hardcore feudal, hardcore what's called the tribal state like this, Saudi Arabia, it provides support to the scientific tempo rather than the liberal arts. Remember, you should understand that. Saudi cannot. Middle East, for example, like the UAE and other countries, they will back only the scientific tempo rather than the liberal arts, which has no utilitarian value in the present context. Or take the case of Malaysia or Indonesia, it can either the liberal arts as well as the scientific tempo. Turkey is falling back into the identity, religious identity, rather than providing and creating a modern Turkey as such. Leave alone the African continent, where the Islamic world is basically based on ethnic identities. So you have the ethnic conflict taking place there between not only Muslim but also between Christians and the Muslims as such. And also you have got, in other parts, you have got the shadow of the Western world, Western hegemony, Western domination. And also you have got reverting back to the conservative or the traditional kind of thing, for example, Afghanistan. So you've got a multiplicity of the state or the political system, and the multiple focus on the knowledge system, science, liberal arts, culture, and other things. And some of the countries are still not overcome from the historical memories. Like, for example, Central Asian countries, they're still in the memories of the past, Russian memories. They still live in the Russian ideology and other things. So given all these things, it is not possible to say that Muslims would not able to emerge, would not contribute in the immediate future. They might contribute. They might contribute. Let's have a hope. But it is possible in the liberal societies, more of a liberal society, than in the conservative societies. Malala could be able to get the Nobel Award, not because she invented anything. Her invention was zero, but she resisted. That's the only thing. Resistance becomes the symbolism. I'll not be surprised this alt news person gets the Peace Award tomorrow. He is not providing any intellectual contribution, but he becomes a symbol of resistance. I remember his name has been recommended for the Nobel Peace Award. The person was arrested for a couple of days back. So the resistance becomes a means to get the world recognition, and also the involvement or connecting with the common people can be a part of the recognition, or scientific tempo can be possible. But I would say that largely, my concluding argument is that Muslims more than Islam, Muslims can contribute more in a liberal state, more in the liberal society than in the hardcore conservative, hardcore revivalist state. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Venkateshwarlu wants to ask a question. Venkateshwarlu, please go ahead.
Sir, yeah, it's a very excellent presentation. Just some small two queries is there. One is the regarding the liberal, secular, and democratic forces within the Muslim community. There is dilemma or complicated situation when they criticize within the Muslim community regarding about the discrimination practices or whatever the thing. Immediately they are receiving that this is not the time because the big onslaught is going on this community. In this situation, you are criticizing the community. This type of criticism they are receiving. So that how they can react in this condition. That is the one. And another thing.
And what exactly is the question? What exactly is the question, Venkateshwar?
The dilemma of the progressive liberal secular forces dilemma.
Is whenever there are liberal progressive Muslims within Muslim liberals and progressives want to bring forth certain important reforms within Muslim culture, they are immediately shouted down that the entire community is facing an existential crisis under the gravest attack from the right-wingers. It is not the time to bring forth the issues of internal reform. This is the first question he asked, and he has another question.
Okay.
Venkateshwar, second.
Yeah, second question regarding the MIM OIC. When we criticize them that your strategy is contributing one of the factors to the strengthening the BJP, but they are saying that we want to increase our space in political scenario. That is our space. We want to develop within the MIM. How we can understand their strategy? Because their strategy ultimately facilitating to increase the BJP votes. Suppose in UP we saw and Bihar also. How can we understand this MIM strategy?
I think I should answer from the last question. Don't treat my argument as a advocacy of strategy. In fact, there are underneath arguments about his political strategy. One argument is that that he is trying to create the space. That's what you said, exactly right. They try to create the space, but his argument should have been backed by a clear-cut analysis, which is lacking actually. The clear-cut, if he makes a clear-cut analysis of the contemporary situation, then obviously his strategy would have been changed. For example, the analysis should include one: who is your primary contradictions? Okay, who is your primary enemy, or who is your larger enemy? The second is that which is a fundamental issue that the community is facing, and from where? The third is that what will happen in the case parties like ours contest the elections? Has he made this kind of analysis? If he makes the analysis, then obviously he'll desist from contesting the election. He'll allow the space for others. For example, like the TRS, he might allow the space for the TRS to speak on behalf of the Muslim at the national level, not at the local level. For example, local level, at the taluka level or the panchayat level, because you need to connect yourself with the people and to help the people, the minorities, you can contest at the grassroots level because your enemy is defined now. Your enemy is known. And that enemy, once he conquer, then obviously that is the end of the community. I'm not saying about any particular thing, whoever it may be. If you see that TRS is your biggest enemy, because TRS has got an agenda of converting India into a Hindutva state, and Hindutva becomes a primary enemy. Then obviously, if you see that TRS Hindutva is the primary program, this program might convert into program extermination of the community. Then obviously you need to back out. Politically, you need to back out and allow the space for the others, secular spaces, to contest the TRS. This is precisely what is absent in the case of the OSC. Had he made the analysis that this is the primary, this is the larger target, this is the larger agenda, this would definitely affect the community as such in due course, I should withdraw, at least for the time being. At least till the secular forces dominate the political scene. At least liberalism triumph. So now, in the midst of this struggle, liberalism versus the non-liberalism, secularism versus non-secularism, Hindutva versus the non-Hindutva kind of politics, if you involve in the politics, if you participate in the politics, ultimately who will benefit? Ultimately, those who are, ultimately it will definitely weaken the secular and the liberal space. That's the reason why, because its very presence would be used to castigate him vis-a-vis the others, vis-a-vis the Hindus. And it will consolidate the Hindu votes and divide the Muslim votes, which ultimately help a particular political party. So you need to employ a particular political party strategy, given the largest situation operating in Indian context. Otherwise, it will definitely help in the otherness of the community. Whoever is doing precisely this one. That's the problematic. That's one important thing. The first question, I've forgotten about it. I'm sorry.
Problems of the reformers. The problems of progressive Muslims who want internal
this happened
reform.
Because, there are two problems actually. One problem is the problem of identifying the progressive Muslim and recognizing them as the authentic Muslims, okay, representative Muslims. Look at, we had Muslim like Asghar Ali Engineer. I don't know whether you heard about the name Asghar Ali Engineer. He was the one who talked about the dialogue between the Muslims and the others. He was the one who talked about the liberation theology. He was the one who advocated the secularism and the liberalism. And there are few. One is Maulana Waiduddin, who talks about the dialogue between the communities and others. What happened is that one side, the state did not recognize this liberal voice. This happened right from the day when Shabanu case was circulating. The state never recognized Asghar Ali Engineer, never recognized Waiduddin or other scholars of it. It never consulted. It consulted Bukharis, the Delhi Bukharis, and treated them as the representative of the Muslims. And what happens is that these same voices, they become delegitimized voices. They become legitimized voices. And the reason, and the net result was that when the parliament adopted the maintenance bill, the voices of the Bukharis, they were heard rather than these fellows. So these voices remain same voice, and these voices are, scattered voices in Indian context. The second important thing is that the moment liberal voices make, there's hardly any voices actually now. Even if there is liberal voices, the most of the liberal voices, like for example, now I would mention one. NELSA's Vice Chancellor, what's his name? Mustafa, Vice Chancellor, who retired a couple of days back. I call him as a sane voice, a single voice. He goes beyond that, the world of Islam. He talks about the others also, but whatever it may be, he's a lone voice. Was there any other voice which I can count in my fingers? There was one voice who died. I mean, there's one voice like Zoya Hassan. I would call it it is a shrill voice. It's a voice, but it's a shrill voice. It's a largely unheard voice. Other voice like, the Kerala's governor, our governor, who is a liberal actually, liberal.
Arif Khan.
Arif Khan. I respected him a lot at a particular point of time. But somehow he has lost that space. He has lost, I don't say that he has, fall back into the Hindutva, but he has lost that space. We don't have much voices. Zoya Hassan's husband was once a vocal voice at the time of the Ayodhya issue. So if you look at the number of liberal voices are far and few, absolutely countable on your fingers. Owaisi is a brilliant man. He is a barrister. But his narratives becomes, one side it becomes anathema, but another side it helps them. That's a major problem. The major problem is that when the liberal voices speak about, they've been condemned. They've been, said that you remain silent because it helps them. But the thing is that whether they do have the larger voice in the politics, that's a major problem. I don't think anybody has got a larger voice in the politics. Whether they've been consulted, no. State never recognized them. Earlier, they never recognized, the state never recognized. Neither the community has allowed them to speak. Neither community considered them as the representative of the Muslim voice. That's a major problem. Imagine that Mustafa, I've forgotten his name, NELSA's Vice Chancellor, contest the election. Remember, pose it. Do you think that he will win the election? No, definitely not. He'll lose the deposit, I'll tell you honestly. Because he's not treated as the honest representatives of the Muslim, but the local, by the grassroots Muslims. He might be intellectually very, very vibrant, intellectually very far superior than anybody else. But his connection, his connection or his connect with the grassroots Muslims is minimal. That's a problem with the intellectual Muslim, liberal Muslim. Muslims, they are unconnected. They are hardly connected to the grassroots politics, the Muslims. That's the reason why they are not being seen as a legitimate force to speak on their behalf. And that's the reason why they don't get the legitimacy to speak, but rather than the religious leader get it. Like the ulamas, they get it. Different schools, they get it. And that's the reason why the liberal space, the liberal, intellectuals, their space shrinks each and every time. They becomes, a voice isolated voice in Indian politics, in Indian context. So that's the reason why two things we have to understand. One is they do not have the legitimacy to speak because they don't. The second is that they don't connect themselves with the common man. They don't speak like the street man, street Muslim. Like, for example, like Muslim, can they speak? No, they can't. Neither they can connect themselves with the common issues of the Muslims. No, they cannot. They speak as an intellectual, which is absolutely unconnected. That's a major problem with this is the reason why when the moment they speak, the others, they said that you should shut down, you should stop talking on behalf of the community. Because they don't carry the majority. That's the problem. So this is what precisely happened in the case of Asghar Ali Nina. Tomorrow Mastan contest the election, he will not get the votes. Remember that. He'll lose. He'll lose his deposit also. But OSC will win in thumping majority. This is the paradox. Probably we live in paradoxes.
Yeah. With that note,
So just Bhargav, just a moment. Of course, we have taken so much of Professor's time. It's been an enlightening session. Just as he was speaking about the disconnect between the intellectual Muslims and the common man, I just want to know one thing. That is whether it is part of my, the preconceived notions that are being held by the other than Muslim communities. They said that's a common Muslim man, the weaker, the poor, the occupational caste. They are under the control or strong influence of the Jamaat. They actually think and act under the instructions of the Jamaat leaders, and that is the one thing where we can see that the liberal ideas are not being spread among them.
That's true. I agree.
Is that true, sir?
Yeah, I agree. Fully agree. It is not only Jamaat alone, but also the religious leaders, the Maulvis and others, because the text which they are referring to is just not translated into the common language. See, they interpret the text, when they are referring to, for example, triple talaq. Okay, let me give one. There are 5 schools of schools. They talk about the triple talaq. Muslim Personal Law Board talks about, Shia Personal Law Board, Sunni Personal Law Board, Women's Personal Law Board. I think there's one more, Deobandi or something. There are 5 schools talks about differently. But you go and talk to the Maulvi, go to the mosque. He gives one interpretation. He quotes from the text, but without telling him what exactly is the meaning. See, the problem is that most of the categories, Muslim categories, when they reach out to their solution, the textual transformation, textual interpretation that Maulvi makes is actually either distorted or unknown to a person. It's like, church, up till this Martin Luther King came, the church had this Latin, language as the state, church language. That's the reason why he rebelled against the state church. And that's the reason why later on the local languages were brought into the church. Like the Sanskrit, when the puja takes place, how many of us understand this Sanskrit slokas? Nobody understands. Whatever he says, we agree. We think that we blindly accept that one. This is a similar case happening in the case of the Muslims. They have remained ignorant. They have remained, unknown to the knowledge. And that's the reason why what happened, they are caught up with these religious leaders, religious fellows, and also the Jamaat. So the space is not allowed, the space is not created. That's the reason why I've been advocating, saying that we need to have more and more civil society groups in the Muslim locality area, which would provide them the sense of democracy, sense of liberalism, sense of secularism, and other things. If it is provide them, then obviously they start questioning. What happens is that unlike the church is a structure, hierarchy, but the mosque has no hierarchy. Remember that mosque, the moment with the church, whenever the church goes, you have a school. Okay, it goes to the first it goes to the out of the city and it establishes a church and then it establishes a school. Between the Muslims and the Hindus, there's even commonality. If a Muslim, establishes a mosque, certainly you'll have a Muslim locality in around, okay, which might translate into ghetto. If there is a temple, it establishes another Hindu locality, okay, without schools. Both are established without schools, without any transformation. If the church, if the temple comes, you have the large number of shops coming up. In the mosque, you don't have what's called the shops coming up, but rather ghettoized houses. And that's the reason why Muslims, particularly Dalits or the Muslims, and both are becomes again and again marginalized. Instead of when you are having a church, temple, or the mosque, why don't you establish an institution? School, college, not the madrasas. Or if you want to establish a madrasa, you have to have the modern, education in that, science, maths, Kannada, Telugu, and other things. So the problem is that whole communities stick to that same thing. They are stereotyped. Like for example, even the training for a mosque, what's called it is also restricted. Unlike the church, where in the seminary you'll have the training for nearly 15 years. You'll be taught the philosophy for many years. You'll be taught the Hindu philosophy, Islamic philosophy, Jain, Buddhist philosophy, Chinese philosophy, and other things. Scientific knowledge and other things. You have to undergo the large number of training. But Muslim seminaries, as well as the pathshalas, they are literally restricting the knowledge, either restricting to the classical text or to the verses, the original text. That's the reason why the teachers who come out from the acharyas, who come out from these pathshalas, from seminaries and other things, they don't have the modern knowledge. They don't have this scientific temper or rational thinking. That itself is transported or it is transplanted among the followers. This is the reason why our ghettos, our regions, our areas become, backward again and again. It reproduces the same kind of attitude, same kind of ghettoized life, same kind of cultural practices. It won't allow any scientific temper to emerge. But when it comes to the question of church, institutions, you have the temper in a completely different paradigm. I mean, it creates a new a kind of individual who is much more liberal than our. This is where one more paradox lies.
Yeah, with that note, that modern education and critical thinking, inculcating critical thinking from very early age and for a long-term change is the only solution for the long-term transformation. With that note, maybe we are coming to an end of this session, and as there are no further questions, maybe we can close this session here. And we are immensely thankful, Professor Assadi, for we close this session. And thank you once more. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Professor Assadi, for a way you enlightened us on a very broad spectrum of issues relating to the Muslim community. We are indebted to you, sir. We will continue this dialogue.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.